apologize for the lateness, the late start. Not very happy with it, but that's how it goes. First order of business today, everybody should receive a copy of the minutes in the email. Do we have any corrections or adjustments to the minutes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to pass the minutes. Second. Representative Blue. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Opposed? Minutes are accepted. All right, committee, before we start our bill hearings, we're going to do a couple of final actions on bills previously heard. We're going to go ahead and take up HB 2102. We'll go to the reviser for overview of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. House Bill 2102 would make appropriation of $250 million from the state general fund to the state treasurer in fiscal year 2023 for the repurchase of certain revenue bonds that were used to finance the unfunded actuarial pension liability of KPERS. You might remember in 2021, there was a $500 million bond issuance. This would now be repurchasing some or all of the outstanding portion of those bonds at prices reflecting a discount up to 75% of the principal amount at maturity of such bonds. And this would again be in fiscal year 2023.
Committee, are there any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, are there any amendments? I do have one amendment. And as we get that sent out, we'll have the reviser explain the amendment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment, if you look there, is that it strikes in line 14. We're striking including accrued interest and actually excluding the accrued interest from the costs of the outstanding portion of the bonds, and then it just inserts at a price or prices reflect not to exceed 79.5% instead of 75%. So it's raising that price slightly, and then taking into account the payment of such account of any transaction costs for purchasing the bonds in excess of $500,000. And then this also then, if you look at the second page, would insert a reappropriation language for fiscal year 2024. This would effectively carry forward that $250 million from fiscal 23, reappropriate into fiscal 24 in case this purchase doesn't happen in 23. You can then go ahead and take effect in 24. And then there's that same proviso language, and there so it has the same parameters, the 79.5% price, and taking into account the excess cost of $500,000, et cetera. So it's just really carrying forward the purchase potentially into fiscal 24 if necessary.
Are there any questions for the reviser? Seeing no questions, I will point out that this amendment was proposed on behalf of the Kansas Development Finance Authority in conjunction with the State Treasurer's Office. Representative Shu.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just kind of a broader question. I don't know if you can answer it or if somebody in the audience can answer. Can we just go into just slightly more detail on the reappropriation from 23-24 and what the intent and what that means?
David, do you want to take that, or do we have somebody in the audience? Yes.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim McMurray with the Kansas Development Finance Authority to address the Vice Chair's question. The rationale there to add fiscal year 24 is to expand the option for the state to execute this program. It may not be, for example, if the market moves away from us, we may, if it's only is enabled in 23, we probably have a 1 to 2 month window to execute, and it's quite possible that we could find ourselves in early fiscal 24. The legislature is not in session, and we're having to wait until the legislature comes back in session and, passes a subsequent law to enable us to take advantage of this opportunity.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, Jim, do you have any final words on this?
Just to go a little bit more into the rationale excluding accrued interest, bond pricing in the secondary market excludes accrued interest. So it's kind of an awkward situation when how we initially drafted up. So we appreciate you making that amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I will move my amendment. Do I have a second? Second by Representative Williams. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, aye. All opposed? Amendment passes. We're back on the bill. Do I have any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Representative Williams.
I move for the passage of House Bill 2102.
Second, as amended.
As amended.
Do I have a second? Representative Dotson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. All opposed? Motion passes. And we're on to final action on HB 2197. We'll go back to the reviser for a quick overview on 2197.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2197, this was the bill that concerned the first-time home buyer savings account. It would add language providing that the naming of a designated beneficiary of such account does not create a survivorship interest in the account in the name of the designated beneficiary. The account holder dies, the balance of the account would be paid to the payable on death beneficiary, or if there was not a payable on death beneficiary named, it'd be in accordance with the provisions of the Kansas Probate Code. The bill also adds language providing that a financial institution may rely on their account records to determine that payable on death beneficiary on the account. If the records conflict with any tax forms required under the Act by the Secretary of Revenue, the payable on death beneficiary and the financial institution's records would control. And then as part of this, it changes the term transfer on death in a couple places to payable on death for the purposes of the Act, as the payable on death is the more correct version for when you're dealing with a bank account versus transfer on death for deeds or titles or other interests. So payable on death instead of transfer on death.
Any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, do we have any amendments? Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment, and I believe it was already emailed out earlier this morning. It's just putting that the treasurer is going to be the one overseeing this account.
David, would you like to explain the amendment a little further, or is the committee satisfied with that explanation? Yeah, we did send it out this morning for everybody to view. Is there any questions for Representative Blue on the amendment? Or the reviser, Representative Shu?
No question. Just wanted to note that I'm fine with this amendment. I don't really care. But just the original version of the first-time homebuyer savings account was in the state treasurer's office when we had a Democratic state treasurer. Was moved out of it last year for no apparent reason. Ran into issues this year and now gets moved back into the Republican state treasurer's office. So just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Representative Shu. Yes, Representative Blue.
I appreciate you pointing that out, ranking. I just want to note too the fact that there are no rules and regulations over this when we had it currently underneath, I believe, Department of Revenue, and the banks have received nothing. And so now I believe having it, this is my first time on this committee, I believe having it on the treasurer, it is an elected position that should be, then there's accountability to that office. So that's why I am bringing this amendment.
I will further add on what Representative Blue said. We did move it to the Department of Revenue, and at that time, Department of Revenue was also under a Democratic governor running for re-election. So the thought of playing politics with this, I think, is a little out there when we moved it from a Democrat treasurer's office to a Democrat governor's office while both of them were up for re-election. So any further discussion, questions? Seeing none,
Remove my amendment.
do I have a second?
Oh.
Representative Williams seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. All opposed? Amendment passes. We're back on the bill. Do we have any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, I will entertain the motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we pass out House Bill 2197 favorably as amended.
Do I have a second?
Clifford seconds.
Representative Clifford. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Before we get started on our two bill hearings today, I do want to give Representative Clifford a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me. I have two young men with me today, both seventh graders. Guys, stand up. To the committee's right is David Walton. He's actually the grandson of my OA, and his good friend, Brody Johnson. They're ready to take over Capers someday, so watch out, Mr. Conroy. Thanks for being here, guys.
Awesome. Welcome to the committee. I hope you guys learned a lot today. And Alan, they're coming for you, buddy. All right, committee, we're going to get started on our first, open our first bill hearing today. We have HB 2195. We will go to the reviser for an overview on HB 2195.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning again, committee. House Bill 2195 concerns Capers working after retirement provisions. So when a Capers retiree, is retired from the system and now is coming back to work for a Capers participating employer. This bill specifically relates to the employer contributions that are made when those retirements come back to work. The bill would require participating employers to pay only the statutory employer contribution rate and all retirement compensation earned during a period beginning July 1st of 2023 and then ending December 31st of 2024. So about an 18-month period there. There would not have to be that 30% rate on any compensation above what's currently listed as at $25,000. It would just be the statutory rate of, I believe it's 12.5% right now, 12.5% for all compensation during this 18-month window. The bill also increases the retirement compensation threshold subject to the statutory Capers contribution rate from the first $25,000 earned by a return in a calendar year. That would increase up to $35,000. This increase is not subject to the December 31st, 2024 end date. This would be a permanent increase in that compensation threshold. So as long as you earn less than $35,000, it would only be statutory rate above $35,000. That's when you have that additional 30% take effect. The bill, you might see there's a lot of strike through in the bill. There's some old working after retirement exceptions that expired back in January of 2018. So we're really just trying to clean up the statute, make this a little easier to read. It's getting rather out of hand. So we're moving a lot of those old, outdated and dead letter law exceptions. And I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you, David. We'll now go to Alan Conroy with Capers for informational brief from the Capers side of this. Alan, welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be here. And working after retirement is one of those areas, you have all this confusion about actuarial funding. Well, working after retirement, trying to keep track of all that has its own set of challenges. And just briefly, the history of it. There was a time going back to 2012, 2011, in that time period where there were quite a number. The waiting period was only 60 days. So particularly school employees could retire at the end of the school year, set out their 60 days, and then come back, at the beginning of the school year. And so certainly our Capers school members, like all of them, are sharp, and that's to their advantage, and the system permitted it, so they could earn their Capers benefit and their salary then the following year. And quite a number of people were taking advantage of that opportunity. The legislature, in sort of true legislative fashion, worked on it over a number of years, special committees, changes, coming back next session, the following session, making more changes, and finally to the point where the poor members didn't know exactly what the working after retirement rules, the employers didn't know, and even the CAPER staff struggled to be able to tell people, okay, this is set, because there was special exceptions for special ed and hard to fill and all these different things, and just got really confusing. So ultimately, the legislature in 2017, effective in 2018, passed basically what the current provisions are under working after retirement. And just briefly, so what the current law is, there's a waiting period. So somebody who retires before age 62 has to set out 180 days before they return to a CAPERS participating employer. They can go work for anybody else, private sector or anything like that, and there's no earnings limitation. If they're age 62 or later, then there's a 60-day waiting period. There's a requirement that there would be no prearrangement, and talk briefly about that, but no prearrangements, which means you can't, as your way out at your retirement party, have the handshake with your employer saying, thanks for the cake, but I'm going to be back in 60 days, and we got this all worked out, save my desk, and all that kind of things. That would be prearrangement. It's not allowed. And then also then, to try to minimize the impact, the actuarial impact to the CAPERS system, then to the trust fund, there were employer contributions imposed. And for the state school, it's currently the employer rate is 12.5% on all earnings below $25,000, and then it goes to 30% on earnings over $25,000. Now, again, this is supposed to be an employer assessment. Some employers then, when they hire that retiree back, negotiate with that salary, because particularly on the school side, CAPER school retirees that return to work are not covered by the continuing contract provisions. And so they sometimes the employer says, well, I would have paid you this, but now I'm going to have to pay this lug to CAPERS, and so I'm going to pay you less. You'll still get that salary, and of course, then your CAPERS retirement. So some employers, though, depending on the situation, the need for the position, may just go ahead and pay that assessment. But again, CAPERS retirees don't have an earnings limitation, and again, they can go to work for anybody else, and it doesn't impact it. KPNF and judges have some different provisions. But just in terms of the statutory changes, as David had explained, really this bill does two things. One, that $25,000 threshold is increased permanently then to $35,000. Anything over $35,000 under the provisions of this bill, then that 30% would kick in. And then there's an 18-month window from this July to January 1st of 2024, where employers would only pay the statutory rate. Again, that 12.5% for state school. It's around a little over 8% for CAPERS local. So that 30% assessment would be waived. And some people call it the CAPERS penalty, which we think is kind of harsh. We always like CAPERS assessment as a more friendlier term. So anyway, so that's the two things that the bill does. The working after retirement's on page 2 of my testimony. Just the whole idea of that contributions to CAPERS is try to make the trust fund maybe not totally whole, but because again, rather than having an active contributing member, you have a retiree filling that slot, and we can talk more about that. And then also maybe perhaps the biggest point out of all this is to keep us square with our friends at the IRS. They're very specific about it has to be a bona fide retirement. So, of course, there have been examples of somebody actually retiring one day, coming back to work the next day, same desk, same salary, same employer, and the IRS has determined that that's not a bona fide retirement. And they just say there has to be a break in service. Well, again, our IRS friends, they don't tell you what a true bona fide break-in services. It's for you all to figure that out. We do know periodically the IRS reviews the plan design, and the 60-day waiting period that's been in there. They did not write us up for that, but they won't tell you exactly what it is. They'll only tell you if you got it wrong. So, but it's important to keep score with the IRS for the tax advantages of that. There's some actuarial cost implications. The bottom of 2 and the top of page 3, but just based on the most recent data, we had increasing that cap from 25,000 to 35,000 would cost. We're estimating about $1.4 million in lower employer contributions, and of course the total liabilities $8.7 billion. So not that 1.4, it's real money with lots of zeros. When you're putting it up against $8.7 billion, it's not I guess a dramatic impact. And then on that window of rolling it back to having that moratorium sort of on that higher rate. Again, there's an actuarial cost. We're in the range of about let's see, about $3-4 million, since it's a limited term impact, and the window would close. Again, we don't believe that would be actuarially significant. And of course, then the last thing, as you increase the limit, that might make it easier for some people. That might encourage some people to go ahead and retire and come back to work, assuming their employer is going to hire them. And that's the behavioral thing. And we won't know, of course, for sure. Do people go ahead and retire and come back to work? Do they not? Do they stay with their original plans to retire in 3 years? And so all that would just have to be sort of monitored and played out over time, and certainly as that goes forward. But again, just 2 changes. One's lowering the cap or increasing the cap permanently, 25 to 35,000 for that higher assessment, and the second one is the 18-month window would be on that higher rate would be capped. But certainly there's some costs, but not dramatic costs.
Questions for Alan, Representative Neely?
I just want to make sure that I understand. They could actually go back to work. They just could not enroll in capers. Is that correct?
Once the member retires, then their benefit that's what it is. If they go back to work, they don't earn any more participating service credit. They don't pay in directly. I mean, the employer pays. So their benefit is frozen, when they retired the first time, if that's helpful. Is that, yeah.
Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, are there any other states that have a shorter period than 60 days? It seems like I remember in the 90s, we were at 30 days. Yeah.
You have a very good memory. That is correct. And states do, some states do have a 30-day waiting period. And again, at least I assume the IRS has not cried foul on that. But you're correct. So other states do have 30 days. In fact, our police and fire is set at 30 days. And that's past IRS muster at this point.
One other question, Mr. Chair. Also on the, I think it was in 2017, we used to have a cap. You could only make $20,000 if you worked after retirement, and then you start losing some of your capers. Since we made that change, as you've seen, how's that affected capers? Have you seen any dramatic changes in the
I think again, it's kind of those difficult times when there are lots of rules and I think this plan, the current plan, I think seems to be working well. I think the actuarial impact is minimal. The employer contributions or assessment, and whoever pays for it, either indirectly the employer seems to be covering quite a bit of the cost. We haven't seen a big uptick, when that change was made, big increase in retirement. So I think the current system is working, not big impact on the actuarial side. And I think a good thing, I think it did achieve that goal of members, employers, and caper staff all understanding what the rules are.
A simpler system.
Yes.
Representative Blow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of piqued my interest. Is this dealing with just capers, or is it dealing with KPNF and with the judicial branch.
This would just be capers,
That's capers.
state, local, and school.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I have a scenario, and you mentioned something earlier, and I have a scenario that hypothetically happened, and I'm curious if it is correct or not. You have a very long time local elected official for a county, and they decide to retire after 40 years working there. Then they sit out their time, but then they're going to come back, and it was all planned. They were going to come back as a consultant part-time. Is that okay?
If the IRS is listening, no. Against that there's no pre-arrangement, and we may or may not know. If anybody asks, we would say generally, and it has to be a capers covered position. So once they get past that, so if it's a temporary position, there's some exceptions. It may not apply, but I think that whole pre-arrangement thing is. I think we're just so, I guess, kind of hyper about it. Sometimes that IRS can have a big old stick, and we want to make sure we're not at the end of it. So
I thank you for that. I just I feel as if we set laws, we make it very black and white, and the moment it's passed, everyone's trying to find the gray. And so just trying to figure out exactly. Thank you.
Let the record show Representative Blue emphasized hypothetical there. So, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Would you touch on that 18 months again for me?
Yes. So this would be an 18-month window that would allow that current higher rate, currently at 30%, that the employer pays either generally directly or through lower pay to the individual retiree, but that would go back to just the statutory rate. So for those 18 months, rather than bumping up to 30%, if they go over 25,000, it would stay at the currently the 12.5% rate for state school.
Not understanding it completely, but after 18 months, the school can't find a teacher still. That they go back to the.
That's right. So under the provisions of this bill, the window would close, and it would go back then to the 30% if that retiree was continued to be employed.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Could I ask the pages if I did all right? Or
what do you guys say?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to our first proponent today. We have Ann Mall, Legislative Liaison, Kansas State Board of Education. Ann, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. Appreciate being here today. Alan and I were talking about it's like deja vu all over again, because right after when I first came to the House in 2005, I got a bill passed so we could ship wine in and out and I could get it at my house. Then I worked on raising the then $15,000 cap on capers up to 25, wasn't it? So it's like, we'll always be tweaking capers. But today I'm here on behalf of the State Board of Education because we're really excited about this. As you know, the teacher shortage is real, and it was made even worse during COVID. So we think that this 18-month pause on the surcharge and raising the cap up to now $35,000 will entice some retirees to come back. I mean, there are a lot of things we could do to get a warm body in the room. I know there's a bill floating around about interstate compact, but this is a way to get real quality teachers back in the classroom, and some of them really want to come back. Just in the last 3 years, we've had almost 2,700 retirees. So there's a really nice pool of qualified teachers out there, and we think that these measures will be a way to at least help us get through the aftermath of COVID. And I'm really thrilled to hear that there's just minimal impact on the fund. So the State Board of Education encourages your support of $21.95. And we're meeting this morning. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to entertain them.
Questions, Representative Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ann, for being here. Just kind of thinking about the potential impact for us. What would you say success metrics might look like for the state if we did pass this?
I don't know that we have a number in mind because there are a lot of factors that play into it. As Mr. Conroy said, they may have moved on to a private sector job, and we don't really have a good way of tracking what these retirees are doing now. So I don't think I could give you a real number, but I think we could get a lot of anecdotal evidence from superintendents who are in touch with these folks right now. And they're telling me too, this would be a very good thing.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, young lady. The 18 months is great, but so a teacher comes back for a year and a half and they leave it semester. I'm thinking, why is this not 24 months? Just a thought.
Well, if you want to make that amendment, make it 36. We'd be thrilled.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ann.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Up next, we have Jim Howe, Chair Pro Tem of the Sedgwick County Commission, and Jim is also a former legislator. So, Jim, welcome to the committee.
Chairman, it's really good to be here today. In fact, I was reflecting on my time here when I was in here for 2 terms. My second 2 years, second term that I was here, Stephen Johnson sat in your chair, and I sat in Bill Clifford's chair. So it was great to be a vice chair of pensions and benefits at the time, is what we called it. And back in the day, we used to work with this guy a lot, and my eyes used to glaze over because he, pensions actually is a very complicated topic. It can be. Pensions law can be very complicated, and I appreciate his testimony. He is a great phone a friend person to have here today, this morning. I do testify on behalf of Sedgwick County. I am a proponent of this bill. The commissioners have this on our platform this year. It's one of our platform issues. And why it's on the platform is because we're having trouble filling vacancies across our organization. Unemployment is a record low and has been low for a long time. And I think this would be very, very helpful to have 18 months. Let me just encourage it. Just as the previous speaker said, longer would be better. I think the 18 months is a little short for this to really do its job. And I think longer would be better. But a couple of things I'd like to point out. I actually have a copy of the bill in front of me, and on page 2, actually, representative over here asked a question. It was exactly the right question, I thought. It says on page 2, top lines 3 and 4, no retirant shall make contributions to the system or receive service credit for any service after the date of retirement. Why is that important? We're talking about penalties to the employer, not to the employee. The employer is the one that pays the penalties. And by the way, we don't have any money. It's all the taxpayers' money. So when we pay a penalty, they're actually passing that on to generally the property taxpayers of our county. You're not really hurting the employee. Now, I think the reason these things are written the way they are, we're trying to discourage people. He said about the pre-arrangement. I think that's exactly right. We're trying to discourage people from just taking retirement as early as possible and come right back to their old job at a cost to the state. And I understand that. I think that is reasonable law. But at the end of the day, the rules are the rules. If it's in someone's best interest to retire at the age they choose to retire, maybe they have a short longevity in their lifetime. Their family doesn't have longevity. For example, maybe retiring early is really in their best interest. Their financial advisor, and they work those details out. They retire when it's best for them. But the penalties don't really impact the employee as much as it impacts the employer. And let me just say it another way. Even if it was the 8% for local government, or if it's the anything over $35,000, we pay a higher penalty of 30%. In either case, it's a cost to the employer. I understand the schools maybe do this a little bit differently than local government would, but maybe the salary would be different if the employer is paying a 30% penalty. So maybe it has an impact on the amount of salary we pay that person for coming back to work. But I don't think we would do that here in Sedgwick County. But the point is, it's really just a cost to the government. And the incentives, in my opinion, are not keeping people from retiring. So the theory is you're going to incentivize them not to retire, but I don't think it works. I guess my point is this. And by the way, when I sat in these chairs back in 2012, back in 2013, 2014, we worked the 2 years I was here, we worked these bills on working after retirement till my eyes glazed over. It was one of the most popular topics. I guess I'd just say this. The state wins if we're paying 8% or we're paying a penalty even up to 30% over $35,000. The state gets more money to cover the unfunded liability. It helps the state of Kansas. It doesn't hurt the state. It actually helps the state. So if the employee does what they want to do, it's better for the employee. It's actually better for the state to bring them back. And again, we also win because if we don't have to pay a higher penalty, we're not passing that cost on to the taxpayers, and we're getting the most skillful person to fill that position. So at the end of the day, we definitely need some help here. This bill is very necessary. We are asking for help. We would ask you to please pass 2195, but I'll tell you, if you can make it longer, or if I could really tell you what I really want to tell you, I think it's just maybe time to realize those incentives aren't working. Take this off entirely. Just forget the time frame entirely. Move it to let people do this all the time. I think, and by we talked about teachers being a shortage. Talk about the next bill, I think, has 3 positions identified in the next bill you guys are going to have a hearing on. It's not just those positions. It's everything. We have every position. We're having trouble finding people that can fill those positions. Chairman, thank you for the chance to speak. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do have one question. How many employees short are we in Sedgwick County right now?
We are right now, I think, about 600 employees short. We have typically about 3,000 employees. We're about 600 employee positions open right now.
Okay. Any Representative Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My friends that are retiring right now, they're too young to retire. They're going to go work somewhere. Like I say, they're at the age where maybe they're 55, and they may get a bonus to early retirement to help them with their insurance and so forth. But again, they're gonna work somewhere. So like I say, if we can keep it in our schools, which are needed, that's a positive. So more of a comment.
Absolutely. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Further question?
Thank you,
for the
Mr.
Commissioner. Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Up next, we have Tim Graham, Director of Government Relations for KNEA. Tim, welcome to committee. I'm always happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's not what you told me before the meeting. If you don't want to see me anymore, you guys can pass a budget and go home. No, I don't mean to be a smart aleck. Thank you for allowing me to testify again in front of the committee. We are in support of 2195. KNEA has been very vocal on the educator shortage crisis. Just so you guys know, we are working on that. We've worked with the Kansas Department of Education to address emergency licensure. We've talked to and testified before several legislators regarding the challenges that we believe are causing this shortage. And we even have programs like Educators Rising that are designed to recruit young people to the profession. So we also, as others have, recognized that this is a real crisis. Those were just a few examples of what we're trying to do to help mitigate that crisis. But in addition to that, we support 2195. We support the notion of retired educators returning to the classroom to assist in filling those shortages. And we're committed to making that path as straightforward and simple as possible. However, there are 2 caveats that we'd like you to be aware of and consider in doing so. Licensure is one, and professional negotiations is the other one. So to talk about licensure real quickly, to ensure that every effort is made to put the best possible people in the classroom, we advocate that proposals which water down licensing and certification standards should be avoided as much as possible. As mentioned above, emergency licensure may be appropriate on a temporary basis, but should not be overused as a strategy to mitigate the teacher shortage. Again, we're committed to working with interested parties in both temporary and permanent solutions to solve the problem of educator shortages, but the shortage alone does not justify an overall reduction to the rigorous standards which ensure that Kansas students have high quality teachers that possess expertise beyond just subject matter knowledge. Now, please don't read this to please don't misconstrue this to read that we have any problems with the legacy licensing process, the way it works, the licensing process which allows these Kansas retired teachers to come back to the classroom. We're not saying that we need to change that whatsoever. But as former Representative Mall mentioned, there are other laws or other proposals before this legislature that we feel could have the potential for lowering the standards of the teachers that are coming in the classrooms And we know states across the United States are also lowering those standards because they too are having a crisis of teacher shortages. So I'll end with professional negotiations. We advocate that educators who return to professional employment after CAPER's retirement should be hired under the same professional negotiated agreement as the other professional employees in that district. So the reason we believe that is we believe this will prevent the practice of turning full-time positions into permanent temporary positions to save money. So we've heard some scenarios where we'll bring in a retired teacher, we'll pay them much less, and we can help balance our local budget that way. We would rather these teachers that are returning, these professionals that are returning to the classroom, be part of the negotiating process as we see it. I have a few notes here that I don't think I need to expand upon. So I thank you for your time, and I'm open for questions.
Any questions for Tim? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Our last proponent today is Chuck Schmidt, former state representative from the 88th District. Chuck, good to see you. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's nice to see many old friends here. I won't go over the same things that the other people mentioned, but I just, myself and Representative Hoyle worked on this last year, and we made some revisions. This, just to give you a little bit of history, this a similar bill did pass this committee last year. Those of you who were on the committee at the time remember it was a bit of a cluster because we were changing as we went, but we finally did pass it, but it didn't go anywhere beyond that. And I worked very closely with Mr. Conroy, and with all due respect, I still do call it a penalty, the 30%. But I understand his point. Being a person who is retired on CAPERS, I want CAPERS to be statutorily well funded. But as he pointed out, this bill would not really significantly harm the statutory funding in any way. One little point I want to make is that the average teacher salary in Kansas is $53,000. So if someone retires, a teacher retires at $53,000 and then comes back with that 30% penalty, they pay an additional $8,400 on that penalty. That's pretty significant. And I think if we waive that for a year, I think that could make a difference. And I understand Mr. Conroy's point as well that, and it's probably a good thing that we just have this for 1 year, because then we can study that. Somebody asked about what are the metrics. We don't really know until we do it. And we might find out, will it bring some teachers back? Because my main focus was teachers when we worked on this, but it also, as Mr. Howell pointed out, public employees in any situation, it could help because we are short in all of those. My understanding is last year we were short 1,400 teachers in public schools in Kansas. This year it's 1,600 in that range. So it's pretty significant. And so if it can bring some back and help us, I think this would be a good thing. So I ask you to do this. There's been a lot of rhetoric about public schools in recent times. This would be something you can do that's positive for public schools and for teachers. Let them know. When we put this together last year, we sat down and we said, how do we get more teachers back in the classroom? Where is the biggest pool of teachers? Retirees. And there are many of them that may want to. I'm not one of those, by the way. I will not come back. I'm past that point. But there are many who may want to come back if this disincentive of $8,400 is removed, at least for a year, to get them back and get them started. So I'm a proponent of 2195, and I stand for questions.
Do you have any questions for Chuck? Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Chuck. And I just wanted to commend you and Representative Joel Hoy on this. We got so many emails from teachers in that last session asking for us to help them. And this was one of the things that we came up with. And I remember passing that on to you too. And you guys did a great job with it. So I sure would like the committee to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Chuck.
Thank you.
I have no other proponents listed. Is there anybody else that would like to speak as a proponent to HB 2195? Seeing none, I don't have any neutrals or opponents listed. Is there anybody that would like to speak as a neutral or opponent to HB 2195? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the hearing and open up the hearing on HB 2272. We'll go to the reviser for a quick explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2272. This is again a Capers Working After Retirement bill. This is going to establish a specific Capers Working After Retirement exemption for retirees who are employed as a licensed professional nurse, licensed practical nurse, or in a direct support position of a Capers affiliated community developmental disability organization. Under this exemption, when the CDDO hires a Capers retirement, there would be no employer contribution for those retirements. But working after retirement provisions relate to the waiting period that had been described earlier, and the no prearrangements, those still do apply. And then this also does make those same strike throughs on some of those old 2018 expired provisions as well to try to get and clean up the working after retirement statute. The legislature has, we talked about in that last bill, the general working after retirement exemption, but the legislature through the years has done specific exemptions for specific positions. You can see some of those starting on page 5 of the bill and moving over towards page 6. And then you can see the new language there on page 6 for these positions. So it's a policy decision for the legislature to enact any of these exemptions for narrow groups.
Any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you so much, David. We'll go back to Alan for another brief overview from Capers side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is a very specific exception or exemption, as David has indicated. So all the working after retirement rules we just talked about, in terms of the waiting period, 60, 180 days, bona fide retirement, no prearrangement, and then an employer assessment. And this would be a Capers local employer, so we're around that 8.5%. On top of page 2 of my testimony just shows the current existing exemptions, or that either have a total exemption or some limit or different employer contribution rate, like licensed professional nurses at state institutions. There's a total exemption on daily calls, substitute teachers without a contract, and that's kind of the defining thing there, whether or not working after retirement applies. Are they truly daily call, or do they have a contract? You can see down the list, poll workers are exempt, state and local elected officials are exempt, and star-based employees, which is a math science thing federally funded through like Forbes and other, I think, military installations to help foster an interest in math and science. And that one might be perhaps the closest similar. They thought there might be maybe like 6 to 10 employees that got exempted. Most of those are Capers retirees, teachers that came back to assist with this star-based program. Again, it just applies to those Capers affiliated community developmental disability organizations. Add them to the list. Working with some of those entities, they're thinking most it might be about around 25 total that this exemption may apply to. And again, these are direct care people, so people actually working with the clients at the CDDO facilities. And so it just makes an exemption so they don't have to pay any employer assessment or contributions, and given it's so limited in terms of, again, the actuarial scheme, that this would be this very small loss of employer contributions would be negligible. And so I guess I'd stand for any questions if appropriate.
Any questions for Alan? Seeing none, thank you, sir. All right, we're going to move to our first proponent. We have Lori Feldkamp from Big Lakes Developmental Center. Lori, welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Lori Feldkamp. I'm the president and CEO of Big Lakes Developmental Center in Manhattan, Kansas. We serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the 4 counties around Manhattan, including Riley, Gary, Potawatomi, and Clay counties. We serve about 200 individuals. In 2023, Big Lakes is celebrating our 50th anniversary. We've been doing that for quite some time. I've been there a little over half of that. So I'm here to speak in favor of House Bill 2272. As Mr. Conroy pointed out, the effects of this bill for us are going to be pretty minimal regarding recruitment of staff. You've heard previous bill about teacher shortage. We have a tremendous shortage of direct support professionals to serve the people that we provide services for. We've had this problem since way before COVID. COVID, of course, just exacerbated this situation. And I think all employers out there in the state of Kansas and probably across the nation are all struggling with finding staff. And we are no exception to that. What this bill, I'm hoping will help us a little bit with our recruitment efforts. I think there's a lot of reasons why we have the workforce shortage that we have. And I think that there are numerous things that we have to look at in order to solve that problem. This is just one little bit to it. What I will tell you is that over the last year, I asked our HR department regarding applications that we got for our direct support professional positions. And we actually got a couple of inquiries from some CAPERS retirees that were interested in coming to work for us. But as is pointed out by Mr. Conroy and is in regulation at the current time, we would pay that 30% assessment. We're going to give you a hard time about that, that 30% assessment. And that is very cost prohibitive for us. And what I would like with this bill is that I think it will open up more possibilities for us for filling our open positions. At the present time, Big Lakes employs about 160 FTE positions, and we have 26 openings. And all of those are in direct support. We are not looking to use this to fill administrative or case management or anything of that nature. It's for direct support that we provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in closing, I will stand for any questions that you might have, but I think this bill would be very helpful for us in our recruitment efforts. Thank you.
Any questions for Lori? Seeing none, thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we have Colin McKinney from Starkey. Colin, welcome to committee. It's good to see you, sir.
Good to be here, Mr. Chairman. Great to see the entire committee. Thank you all for your time this morning. I'm the chief executive of Starkey in Wichita. We support, obviously, that city as well as all the surrounding communities there in Sedgwick County. We should be employing about 450 amazing workers at this point in time. And right now we're around 370. That's surprisingly good. You may have been in a hearing last year and heard me talk about we were closer to 300 employees and we were at wit's end. As Senator McGinn, kind of joked with me a little bit, it is a bad day when Colin is the person who comes to work a shift in the home where you live to provide you support care, because that's probably not my forte. But that's where we were at, trying to cover all the needs. A great amount of appreciation to all of you for the support you gave us to increase the reimbursement rate that we receive. We immediately applied that to the wages we pay, and it helped. We have been up over 150 vacancies in our organization at points in time, and now we're somewhere around 80 that we are trying to fill. So that feels like great progress. We're very pleased about that. The stress level has decreased, but now my role is where else can we find those employees? And CAPERS retirees are a great potential pool for us. If you've got a copy of my testimony, you can see that some of the things that we would look to, they should be able to pass background checks, and we will run between 8 and 10 background checks before we can hire somebody. They may have been doing very similar work for a local school district, and the flexible schedules that we offer would be an enticement. They have already demonstrated a long-term commitment to work. A lot of the people we hire, no commitment to work. And so if we can invest those training dollars and that time to onboard people who have already demonstrated the willingness to come to work every day and perform their jobs, that's a great get for us. And wages may be less of a consideration. We were able to raise our typical starting wage, or our lowest starting wage, to around $15 an hour, which was a nice improvement. But that's still, you can imagine, in our local community, that's not terribly competitive. So if someone is also earning a retirement income, this could be an enticement for them. The pay may not be as big of a consideration. I can tell you that the other thing that we wanted to accomplish with this is that it just creates scheduling headaches. We currently employ 3 Capers retirees. One of them is a go-to person. And so as we were trying to fill shifts last fall, and had bumped up against that person's $25,000 cap, the phones start ringing. Can he continue to work? Where are we at? And the bottom line was, we have to cover the shifts. And so, once we're paying that 30% assessment, not penalty, for that individual to continue to cover shifts, that's one of the more expensive employees that we have to pay. We're thankful that it only applied to that one employee, but as we go forward, if we're successful in hiring more Capers retirees, that could be a larger issue for us. So this is not a great big solution for us. It's certainly not as much as the reimbursement rate increase that you all approved last year, but it's a piece that will help and feels like it moves us in the right direction. Be happy to stand for any questions.
Colin, I have one question. Can you talk about the impact on services you offer with your employee shortage? How impactful is that to the services you offer, your organization offers?
It's inconsistency in people's lives. And I joke a little bit about, when I'm the person who shows up, I don't know those people as well as the employee who should be working with them each and every day. Again, as Lori said, we're providing services 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And going back in time a little bit, someone who was not in our residential services, I asked him about that, and he said, I could not stand to lose my direct support staff. He would rather stay in his family home where he knows mom and dad may not be able to do what our employees can do, but they're there every day. And he worried so much about that inconsistency and who's going to be here, and do they know me? Do they know what I like to eat? Are they going to help me with my meds the way I need that? My clothing choices, going to the bathroom. I mean, it's everything all around the clock, all the time. The better we can do in maintaining the same employee day after day, month after month, year after year, that's consistency in someone's life and gives them a sense of security.
Thank you for that explanation. Are there any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Nick Wood, Associate Director for Interhab. Nick, welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Heisel, members of the committee. I will keep my comments short. Really just want to support Lori and Colin's comments. House Bill 2272 would open up workforce options among retired professionals who likely already have human services experience that would make them great candidates for working at IDD support, for an IDD support provider. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a description of what a DSP is in case you had any questions in your mind. Also, just based on a survey here in Kansas, we know that demand for DSPs across generations, kind of across disability, is going to go up around 26% by 2029. And that's because the population is getting older. And of course, just like the general population, the population amongst people with IDD is also getting older. There's more people who are living in the community, living healthier lives. There's less institutionalization than there used to be. And so people are getting older. Their needs are different in the community. We need to be able to be flexible enough to meet those needs. I think that House Bill 2272 is definitely a benefit to helping us meet those workforce challenges. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Nick? Seeing none, thank you so much, sir. I believe Representative Shu had a question for either Alan or the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is maybe putting the cart before the horse just a little bit, but I'm just trying to turn over in my head how, if these two bills both do pass, how they would interact. So my understanding is that if that first bill passes, the IDD nurses would be inclusive in that. And so we would raise the cap, and then there would be that 18-month period where they would just pay the employers pay just the statutory required rate. But then if this one also passes, they would also just be kind of in that permanent exemption for just the statutory retired required rate. Is that correct?
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, if both bills were to pass, the CDDO positions, they would have that permanent exemption. They would not have to pay any employer contributions for those positions. Yeah, they would be out. They would not be subject to the window or the 35,000 threshold. I mean, because this would be a specific exemption for those positions, and they would not pay contributions.
Alan, do you have anything to add to that? All right. Do we have any other questions for the revisor or Alan on this topic or the last bill, now that we heard some testimony? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing. I'm sorry. We do have two written proponents. So go ahead and take a look at that testimony as well. I have no neutrals or opponents signed up to speak today. Do we have any neutrals or opponents that would like to speak on HB 2272? Seeing none, we'll go ahead now and close the hearing on HB 2272. Committee, just a quick housekeeping item. Next Monday, we are meeting. We are hearing HB 2196, which is expanding the drop program, and 2198, which deals with parks and wildlife and moving them to KPNF, Capers. Those agendas will come out today. It is my intention that after we hear those bills, we will work those bills. Monday is the last day we can meet before turnaround. So it's my intention to work those bills and possibly other bills that we've heard this session as well. We may go long, just giving you guys a heads up. We may go back past our 10:30 deadline Monday, but again, it's the last day we can meet. So we need to get everything out of here that we want to get to the House floor. So with that, with anybody have any other business for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.